The advertisement in the Boston Herald promised a respectable arrangement with a cattle rancher in Telluride, Colorado, and Helena Thornton had responded within the hour because desperation had a way of making decisions remarkably simple. She stood on the wooden platform of the train station in late September of 1883, her black mourning dress collecting dust from the mountain wind, watching as miners and ranch hands moved past her like she was just another piece of luggage waiting to be claimed. Her father had died 6 months ago, leaving nothing but gambling debts that circled like vultures, and her brother had made it clear that his new wife had no intention of housing a spinster sister indefinitely. Marriage to a stranger seemed no worse than slow starvation wrapped in false courtesy. A man approached with his hat pulled low, and Helena straightened her spine the way her mother had taught her before consumption had stolen her away. He was tall, broad-shouldered in a way that spoke of hard work rather than soft living, and when he finally looked up, she found herself staring into eyes the color of creek water in summer, green, gray, and startlingly direct. "Miss Thornton." His voice carried the rough edges of the frontier, but something gentler moved beneath it. "Yes, Mr. Sutton, I presume," he nodded, reaching for her trunk without waiting for permission. "Harrison Sutton. Welcome to Telluride, Miss Thornton. I hope the journey was not too difficult." It was long. She did not elaborate because what else could be said about crossing half a continent to marry a man whose only credentials were a decent hand at letter writing and a need for a wife? His wagon waited at the edge of town, a sturdy thing pulled by 2 horses that looked better cared for than most of the people she had seen. Harrison loaded her belongings with an efficiency that suggested he did not waste time on unnecessary flourishes, then helped her onto the seat with a hand that was calloused but careful. The town of Telluride spread below them in the valley, surrounded by mountains that seemed to scrape the sky itself. The aspens were turning gold, and the afternoon sun painted everything in shades of amber and bronze. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that made Boston's manicured parks seem like pale imitations of something real. "The ranch is about 8 miles out," Harrison said, guiding the horses onto a dirt road that climbed gradually away from town. "Not much to look at, but the land is good and the cattle are healthy." Helena folded her hands in her lap. "Your letter mentioned you had been managing the ranch alone for 2 years. My father died in the winter of '81. Pneumonia took him fast." Harrison kept his eyes on the road. "My mother passed when I was 12. It has been just me since then, except for 2 ranch hands who help during calving season and roundup." "I see." She paused, then forced herself to ask the question that had haunted her since accepting his proposal. "Why did you choose to advertise for a wife rather than court someone locally?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The women in town want a man who will take them to dances and socials every Saturday night. I do not have time for that. I need a partner who understands that ranch life is hard work and long hours, not romance novels and pretty promises." There it was then. The truth laid bare like bones in the desert sun. He wanted a worker, not a wife. A transaction, not a transformation. Helena had expected as much, but hearing it stated so plainly still sent something cold through her chest. "I understand completely, Mr. Sutton. I assure you I have no illusions about this arrangement. You need someone to manage your household and I need security. It is a fair exchange." He glanced at her then, something unreadable crossing his face. "You can call me Harrison. We will be married tomorrow at the church if that suits you. Reverend Matthews is expecting us at 10 o'clock. Tomorrow. 12 hours from now, she would be bound to this stranger for the rest of her life." Helena swallowed against the tightness in her throat and nodded. "That is acceptable." The ranch appeared as they crested a hill, a modest house built from logs and stone with a wide porch that wrapped around two sides. The barn stood solid and well-maintained, corrals branching out from it in organized sections. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark shapes against the golden grass. Mountains rose on all sides, creating a valley that felt both sheltered and isolated. Harrison stopped the wagon near the house and helped her down. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the sun-weathered skin, the way his hair curled slightly at his collar where it needed cutting. He was probably close to 30, perhaps a few years older. Old enough to have learned hardness, but young enough that it had not completely consumed him. "I will show you the house," he said, carrying her trunk up the porch steps. The interior was cleaner than she had anticipated. The main room held a stone fireplace, a worn but sturdy sofa, and a dining table with 4 chairs. The kitchen occupied one corner, equipped with a cast iron stove and shelves lined with preserved goods. 2 doors led to what she assumed were bedrooms. Harrison set her trunk down and gestured to the door on the left. "That will be your room. Mine is on the other side. The washroom is out back, though I have been meaning to build a proper bathing room attached to the house before winter sets in." Helena walked to the doorway of her designated room and found a simple space with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. It was more than she had expected, honestly. More privacy, more consideration. "Thank you," she said quietly. "This is quite adequate." Harrison stood in the middle of the main room, his hat in his hands now, looking as uncomfortable as she felt. "I imagine you are tired from the journey. There is stew left from yesterday if you are hungry, and I can heat water for tea. I need to check on the cattle before dark, but I will be back before nightfall. I can manage, thank you." He nodded, set his hat back on his head, and left without further ceremony. Through the window, Helena watched him stride toward the barn, his movements purposeful and sure. Then she sank onto the bed and allowed herself, for just a moment, to feel the full weight of what she had done. She had sold herself into this arrangement as surely as if she had stood on an auction block. Love was a luxury for people with choices, and she had none. Tomorrow she would marry Harrison Sutton, and they would live as business partners under the same roof. And that would be the sum total of her existence, until death brought its own kind of freedom. Helena unpacked her few belongings with mechanical precision, hanging her 2 other dresses in the small wardrobe and placing her mother's silver brush on the dresser. Her hands trembled only slightly as she arranged the photograph of her parents, young and smiling in a way she barely remembered. They had loved each other once, before illness and hardship had ground that love down to bitter endurance. Perhaps it was better to begin with honest expectations. Perhaps transaction was safer than transformation. The stew was indeed still good, and she ate a small portion while the afternoon light slanted through the windows in dusty gold beams. The house felt strange around her, too quiet and too full of another person's history. She washed her bowl and tidied the kitchen, needing something to do with her restless hands. Harrison returned as the sun touched the mountain peaks, bringing with him the smell of hay and horses. He washed at the pump outside, then entered with his hair damp and his sleeves rolled up. "Everything is secure for the night," he said. "The hands will be here tomorrow afternoon to help move some cattle to the lower pasture before the weather turns." Helena had moved to the sofa with her needlework, though she had accomplished exactly 3 stitches in the past hour. "Is there anything you need me to prepare for them? They usually bring their own food, but coffee would be appreciated if you do not mind making a large pot." "Of course." Silence settled between them, awkward and heavy. Harrison built up the fire against the evening chill, and Helena focused on her embroidery with far more intensity than it warranted. Finally, Harrison cleared his throat. "I should say something about tomorrow, about our arrangement." Helena set down her needlework and met his eyes. "Please speak plainly. I expect you to manage the household, help with the garden, preserve food for winter, and assist with the chickens and such. In return, you will have a home, security, and my name. I will not." He paused, clearly uncomfortable. "I will not expect marital relations unless you indicate a willingness. This is a partnership, Miss Thornton, not a prison." Heat crept up Helena's neck despite herself. "That is generous of you. It is decent. There is a difference." He stood abruptly. "I will turn in early. Morning comes fast out here. You should rest as well." He disappeared into his room before she could respond, leaving her alone with the crackling fire and her tangled thoughts. She had not expected consideration, and somehow that made it worse. It would be easier if he were cruel or callous. Instead, he was simply practical, and she could not fault him for offering exactly what they had both agreed to. Helena changed into her nightgown in the privacy of her new room and lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the wind move through the valley. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The mountains held the darkness close, and she had never felt so far from everything she had known. Morning arrived with shocking brightness, the sun striking the peaks and flooding the valley with light so clear it seemed to cut like glass. Helena dressed in her best dress, a deep blue that had been expensive once but now showed wear at the cuffs. She pinned her dark hair into a careful arrangement and allowed herself one long look in the small mirror. At 23, she was not beautiful but not plain either. Acceptable. Average. Suitable for a transaction. Harrison waited in the main room, wearing a clean shirt and a string tie that looked uncomfortable on him. He had shaved, and it made him look younger, more vulnerable somehow. "You look very nice," he said, and seemed surprised by his own words. "Thank you, as do you." They rode to town in the wagon, the silence between them somehow different from yesterday's. The church was a modest white building near the center of Telluride, its steeple pointing skyward like an accusation. Reverend Matthews met them at the door, a kind-faced man with gray hair and eyes that seemed to see more than was comfortable. "Harrison, good to see you, and this must be Miss Thornton." "Helena, please," she said, accepting his handshake. "We will need witnesses," the Reverend said. "I took the liberty of asking Martha and John Brennan to stand in. I hope that is acceptable." An older couple emerged from inside the church, smiling warmly. Martha was a plump woman with flour still dusting her sleeves, and John had the weathered look of a long-time miner. "We were honored to be asked," Martha said, taking Helena's hands. "Welcome to Telluride, dear. I run the boarding house on Main Street, and you must come visit once you are settled." The ceremony was brief and businesslike. Helena repeated vows that felt like a legal contract, and Harrison did the same with his voice steady and his expression unreadable. The ring he slid onto her finger was a simple gold band that fit surprisingly well. When Reverend Matthews told Harrison he could kiss his bride, there was a long, awkward pause before Harrison leaned in and pressed his lips to her forehead with such careful restraint that Helena felt something crack in her chest. They signed the documents, accepted congratulations from the Brennans, and then they were back in the wagon, heading toward the ranch as husband and wife. Mrs. Helena Sutton now. The name felt foreign and strange in her mind. "Thank you for being respectful during the ceremony," Helena said, because the silence was becoming unbearable. Harrison kept his eyes on the road. "I meant what I said yesterday. This is a partnership. I will not take advantage. Most men would consider it their right." "Then most men are fools." He said it with such flat conviction that Helena found herself studying his profile, trying to understand this man she had legally bound herself to. The ranch hands arrived that afternoon as promised. Two weather-beaten men named Frank and Peter, who tipped their hats to Helena and seemed genuinely pleased that Harrison had found a wife. She made coffee and set out biscuits she had quickly prepared, and they thanked her with a courtesy that suggested Harrison had chosen his help well. She watched from the porch as the men worked the cattle, moving them with dogs and horses in a choreographed effort that spoke of long practice. Harrison sat his horse like he had been born to it, his movements economical and sure. There was a kind of rough grace to the work, a connection to land and animal that she had never witnessed in Boston's crowded streets. That evening, Helena prepared a proper dinner with the supplies she found in the kitchen. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans put up from last season. It felt strange to cook for a husband, to set the table for two, to perform the domestic rituals she had always assumed would be accompanied by affection rather than careful politeness. Harrison ate with appreciation, complimenting her cooking in a way that suggested he meant it. They discussed the cattle, the coming winter, the need to repair part of the barn roof before the snow arrived, practical matters, safe topics, the conversation of business partners. The days began to establish a rhythm. Helena woke at dawn and prepared breakfast, managed the chickens and the modest garden, spent her afternoons preserving the last of the summer vegetables and mending clothes. Harrison worked from sunup to sundown, coming in for meals and falling asleep in his chair more often than not. They were polite, considerate, and absolutely distant. A week passed, then two. The aspen leaves turned from gold to rust and began to fall. Helena learned the house's quirks, the way the stove needed coaxing in the mornings, the loose board on the porch that creaked, the view from the kitchen window that caught the sunrise just right. She learned Harrison's habits too, the way he drank his coffee black and scalding, how he rubbed his left shoulder when it ached from old injury, the fact that he read at night from a small collection of books that suggested more education than his rough exterior implied. But she did not learn him. Not really. They existed in the same space like two planets in separate orbits, never quite touching. October arrived with frost that painted the grass white each morning. Helena was in the chicken coop, gathering eggs, when she heard raised voices from the direction of the barn. She emerged to find Harrison and a stranger facing each other with the kind of tension that preceded violence. The stranger was younger than Harrison, perhaps 25, with a face that would have been handsome if not twisted with anger. "You cannot keep hiding behind property lines, Sutton. That land by the creek should have been my father's, and everyone knows it. Your father lost the land fair and square in a card game, Dale. My father won it honestly. This was settled years ago." Harrison's voice was calm, but Helena could see the way his hands had moved closer to his sides. "Ready. Settled by cheaters. Your old man stacked that deck, and my father died knowing he had been robbed. That is a lie, and you know it." Dale's hand moved toward his hip, and Helena's heart stopped. But Harrison was faster, his own hand now resting on the gun she had not realized he wore. "Do not do something stupid," Harrison said quietly. "Go home, Dale. Sleep off whatever you have been drinking." For a long moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then Dale spat in the dirt and turned away, mounting his horse with jerky, furious movements. "This is not over, Sutton. Not by a long shot." He rode off at a gallop, leaving dust and threats hanging in the air. Harrison stood perfectly still until the hoofbeats faded, then seemed to deflate slightly. He noticed Helena standing frozen by the chicken coop. "How much did you hear?" he asked, walking toward her. "Enough." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Is he dangerous? Harrison sighed, pushing his hat back. The Wheaton family has been making noise about that creek land for 15 years. Dale is angry and drinks too much, but I do not think he would actually do anything. Still, I should have warned you. I am sorry you had to witness that. This is my home now too, Helena said, surprising herself. I should know if there are threats. Something shifted in Harrison's expression, a softening around his eyes. You are right. Yes. Dale Wheaton and his older brother Cyrus have both made accusations over the years, but nothing has ever come of it. My father won that land legitimately in a poker game before I was born. There was no cheating. But the Wheatons lost most of their property over the years through bad decisions, and they need someone to blame. Are there others who might cause trouble? No. Most people around here are decent. The Wheatons are the exception. He hesitated. But I want you to know where I keep the rifle in the house, just in case. And if anyone comes around when I am not here, you do not open the door unless you know them. Fear touched Helena's spine with cold fingers, but she nodded. Show me. Harrison took her into the house and showed her the Winchester rifle above the door and the shotgun in the corner of his bedroom. He taught her to check if they were loaded, how to hold them properly. His hands were patient, guiding hers without presumption. Have you ever fired a gun? He asked. No. Then we will practice tomorrow. You should know how, living out here. The next morning, Harrison set up targets behind the barn and spent 2 hours teaching Helena to shoot. The rifle's kick surprised her, slamming into her shoulder hard enough to bruise. But by the end of the lesson, she could hit the target more often than not. You have steady hands, Harrison said with approval. That is good. Helena lowered the rifle, feeling the ache in her arms and shoulders. My father used to say I was too stubborn to miss. It was the first personal thing she had shared, and Harrison seemed to recognize it. Was he a good man, your father? Once, perhaps. He lost himself after my mother died. The gambling became his way of forgetting. She paused, then added quietly, I think he was relieved when the consumption finally took him too. I am sorry. That is a hard thing to carry. We all carry hard things. She met his eyes. Your father's death was not easy either. No. Harrison took the rifle from her, his fingers brushing hers briefly. But he had a good life here. He loved this land. I hope I am doing right by his memory. I think you are. They walked back to the house together, and something felt different. Not transformed exactly, but perhaps the first small shift in orbit, a fractional movement toward intersection. The days grew colder. Helena planted winter wheat in the prepared garden beds, her hands learning the feel of Colorado soil. She made preserves and pickles, filling the pantry shelves with jewel-toned jars. Harrison brought in firewood by the cord, stacking it carefully under the shelter he had built. They were preparing for winter like animals sensing the change in the air. One evening in late October, Helena was kneading bread when Harrison came in from the barn looking troubled. One of the mares is having difficulty foaling, he said. I may need to stay in the barn tonight. Can I help? He looked surprised. It is not pleasant work. I helped birth my neighbor's baby in Boston when the doctor could not come in time. I am not squeamish. Harrison studied her for a moment, then nodded. Get your coat. The mare was in distress, her eyes rolling white in the lamplight. Harrison spoke to her in a low, soothing voice while his hands examined her with practiced care. The foal is turned wrong, he said grimly. I need to try to shift it, or we will lose them both. Helena held the lantern steady while Harrison worked, his entire arm disappearing as he tried to reposition the foal. The mare screamed, and Helena found herself talking to her, nonsense words of comfort that seemed to help more than silence. It took an hour of careful manipulation, of patience and determination, before Harrison finally felt the shift. "Got it. Come on, girl, you can do this now." The foal arrived in a rush of fluid and blood, and for a terrible moment it lay still. Then Harrison cleared its nostrils and rubbed it briskly with straw, and suddenly it gasped and shuddered and began to breathe. The mare turned to nuzzle her baby, and the sound she made was so tender that Helena felt tears sting her eyes. "A colt," Harrison said, sitting back on his heels with exhaustion written across his face. "Strong one, too. He will be fine." Helena set down the lantern and realized her hands were shaking. "I thought we would lose them." "So did I." Harrison looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time since she had arrived. "Thank you for your help, for staying. We are partners, are we not? That is what partners do." Something passed between them in the warm darkness of the barn, with new life breathing softly in the straw and the night cold pressing against the walls. Not love, not yet, but perhaps the first recognition that transaction might contain the seeds of something more. They walked back to the house together as dawn began to pale the eastern sky, both too tired for words. Helena heated water for washing, and they took turns at the basin, cleaning away blood and birth fluid in companionable silence. "You should rest," Harrison said, but his eyes were already closing where he stood. "So should you." But neither of them moved toward their separate rooms. Instead, Harrison sank onto the sofa, and Helena found herself sitting beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of him. His breathing deepened into sleep within minutes, and she let herself study his face in the growing light. The lines of worry, the strong jaw, the way his hair fell across his forehead. He was handsome in a rugged, unpolished way, but more than that, he was good, decent, kind without performance. Helena rested her head against the back of the sofa and closed her own eyes, and when she woke hours later, she found Harrison's coat draped over her like a blanket, and the man himself nowhere to be seen. November brought snow that transformed the valley into something from a winter tale, beautiful and treacherous in equal measure. Helena learned to navigate the cold, layering clothes and wrapping herself in the wool shawl Harrison produced from his mother's trunk. The cattle grew shaggy coats, and the horses pressed close together in the barn at night. The world contracted to the space between house and barn, between survival and comfort. Helena and Harrison fell into new patterns. He taught her to read the weather in the sky, to judge when snow was coming by the behavior of the animals. She taught him that meals could be more than fuel, that even simple food could become something approaching pleasure with the right attention. They played chess in the evenings, a board his father had carved, and she discovered that Harrison was a thoughtful player who considered every move with care. They talked more now. Small things at first, then larger. Harrison told her about growing up on the ranch, about his mother who had made beautiful quilts and sang while she worked. Helena shared memories of Boston, of her father before the gambling consumed him, of the books she had loved and the life she had once imagined. One evening, after she had won 3 games of chess in a row, Harrison laughed a real, full laugh that transformed his entire face. "You have been toying with me," he accused without heat, "letting me think I had a chance." "I may have studied chess more thoroughly than I admitted," Helena said, unable to suppress her own smile. "Devious woman." But he said it with something that sounded almost like affection. The fire crackled and snow whispered against the windows, and Helena realized with a start that she was happy. Not content, not merely surviving, but actually happy. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. "Harrison," she said carefully, "may I ask you something personal?" His smile faded into something more guarded. "Of course. Why did you really send for a mail-order bride? The truth this time." He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Then he stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness. "I was engaged once," he said finally. 4 years ago. Sarah Fielding, daughter of the banker in town. We courted for a year, and I thought we would build a life together. But when my father died and left me with nothing but debt and a failing ranch, she broke the engagement within a week. She married a mining engineer 3 months later and moved to Denver. Helena's chest tightened with understanding. She wanted security. She wanted certainty. I could not offer that. It took me 2 years to make the ranch profitable again, and by then, I had realized that most women would see me the way Sarah did, as a risk. So I decided to be honest from the start, to offer a transaction rather than false promises. And I accepted because I needed the same thing. Security over sentiment. Yes, he turned to face her. But you are not what I expected, Helena. Her heart beat faster. What did you expect? Someone harder, I think. More calculating. Instead, you stayed up all night to help birth a foal. You laugh when you beat me at chess. You sing while you cook, probably without realizing it. You are kind to the chickens, for God's sake. Helena stood, moving closer to him. You are not what I expected either. No. I expected someone who would use me. Instead, I got a man who drapes his coat over me when I fall asleep. Who teaches me to shoot not to control me but to protect me. Who reads poetry when he thinks I am not watching. Harrison's eyes widened. You notice that? I notice everything about you. The admission hung between them, vulnerable and true. Harrison reached out slowly, giving her every chance to step away, and touched her face with his calloused hand. Helena, I do not want this to be a transaction anymore. What do you want it to be? Something real, if you are willing, if I have not ruined things with my coldness at the start. Helena covered his hand with her own, turning to press a kiss to his palm. You were not cold. You were careful. There is a difference. He drew her closer, and when his lips met hers, it was nothing like the chaste kiss at their wedding. This was heat and hunger, question and answer, the intersection of two orbits finally colliding. Helena wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the longing she had been suppressing for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. I am falling in love with you, he said roughly. I have been for weeks, but I was afraid to say it. I love you too. The words came easier than she had imagined. I think I have since you taught me to shoot, though I did not recognize it at the time. He laughed, that wonderful transformation of his face again. Of all the moments, you were patient with me. You made me feel capable rather than fragile. That meant everything. Harrison kissed her again, deeper this time, and Helena felt the last of her walls crumbling. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with desire, but also with something more important, respect. I do not want to rush you, he said. We can take this as slowly as you need. Helena smiled and took his hand, leading him toward his bedroom. We have been married for over a month, Harrison. I think we have been patient enough. What followed was tender and passionate, awkward and perfect. Harrison treated her like something precious, and Helena discovered that transformation was not a single moment but 1,000 small revelations. The way his hands learned her body with reverence, the way he whispered her name like a prayer, the way they fit together, finally and completely. Afterward, they lay tangled in his bed while snow fell softly outside, and Helena traced the scar on his shoulder that she had noticed weeks ago. How did you get this? She asked. Thrown from a horse when I was 16. Broke my collarbone. My father said it, but it healed slightly crooked. He caught her hand and kissed her fingers. How did you get the scar on your wrist? Helena looked at the thin white line she usually kept hidden. I broke through ice on a pond when I was 8, cut myself on the edge climbing out. My mother nearly fainted from fear. We are both survivors then. Yes. and now we are surviving together." Harrison pulled her closer, and Helena rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. This was what she had needed all along, though she had not known it. Not security without affection, not transaction without transformation. But this, partnership deepening into love, safety expanding into passion, two separate people choosing to become something more. December arrived with storms that trapped them inside for days at a time. They did not mind. Helena moved her belongings into Harrison's room, and they spent long nights discovering each other in every way. Harrison proved to be a generous lover, and Helena found a boldness she had not known she possessed. But more than the physical intimacy, they talked for hours, sharing histories and hopes, fears and dreams. "I always wanted children," Helena admitted one evening as they lay in bed watching firelight dance on the ceiling. "But I thought I would never have the chance." Harrison's arm tightened around her. "I want them too, a house full of noise and chaos, children who grow up knowing they are loved the way I did. Then we will have them." She turned to face him. "A family of our own." "The first of many transformations," he said, kissing her softly. Christmas came simple and sweet. Harrison carved her a small box from cedar, lined with velvet he had ridden to town through a blizzard to purchase. Helena gave him a shirt she had sewn in secret, embroidered with his initials in careful stitches. They were small gifts, inexpensive, but they held more meaning than gold. They made love on Christmas night with particular tenderness, and afterward Harrison held her close and said, "I thank God every day that you answered my advertisement. I did not deserve you." "We both deserve this," Helena corrected. "We both deserve happiness." January and February were brutal months of snow and wind, but the ranch survived. Helena proved herself capable in crisis, helping Harrison dig out trapped cattle, nursing frostbitten chickens back to health, keeping the house warm and welcoming no matter what raged outside. They were a team now, truly, working in harmony toward common goals. In March, Helena began to suspect she was pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Harrison, choosing a moment when they were checking the new foal in the barn, the colt now grown strong and playful. "Harrison, I have news." He turned from examining the colt's legs, his face open and curious. "Good news, I hope, the best. We are going to have a child." For a moment he simply stared at her. Then a smile broke across his face like sunrise, brilliant and unstoppable. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "Careful," she protested, but she was laughing too. "You will make me dizzy." He set her down gently, his hands cradling her face. "A child, our child. Helena, you have made me the happiest man in Colorado. I am happy too." Terrified but happy. "We will figure it out together, everything together from now on." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and summer. Helena's body changed, swelling with new life, and Harrison treated her with such careful devotion that she sometimes had to remind him she was not made of glass. He built a cradle from pine, sanding it smooth and carving small stars along the edge. Martha Brennan from town visited regularly, bringing advice and supplies, becoming the friend Helena had not realized she needed. In early October, exactly 1 year after they had met, Helena went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when she feared something would go wrong. But Harrison stayed beside her the entire time, holding her hand, offering water and encouragement, never flinching from the reality of birth. Their son arrived with the dawn, red-faced and furious, with a set of lungs that promised years of noise to come. "He is perfect," Harrison said, tears streaming down his face as he held the tiny, squalling baby. "Helena, look what we made." Helena, exhausted and elated, reached for them both. "What should we name him? I always liked the name James after my grandfather." "But you should choose the middle name." "James William Sutton," Helena said, thinking of her father before the gambling had destroyed him. "After the man my father was supposed to be." "James William Sutton," Harrison repeated. "Welcome to the world, son." The baby's cries quieted as he nursed, and Helena looked up to find Harrison watching her with such love that it took her breath away. "Thank you," he said softly, "for taking a chance on me, on us, for turning a transaction into a transformation." "You did that too," Helena said. "We did it together." The first year of James's life was exhausting and beautiful. He was a colicky baby who rarely slept, and there were nights when Helena and Harrison took turns pacing the floor, singing lullabies and making desperate bargains with God for just a few hours of rest. But there were also mornings when James would smile his toothless smile, and afternoons when he would laugh at absolutely nothing, and evenings when he would fall asleep on Harrison's chest, tiny and trusting. The ranch prospered. Harrison hired another full-time hand, a quiet young man named Tom who was good with cattle and grateful for honest work. This freed Harrison to spend more time helping Helena with the house and the baby, a luxury he had never imagined possible. Dale Wheaton made one more attempt at trouble in the spring of 1885, showing up drunk and belligerent. But this time, Harrison was not alone. Helena stood on the porch with the shotgun held competently, and Tom emerged from the barn with his rifle, and Frank and Peter rode up from the south pasture with grim expressions. Dale took one look at the united front and rode away, and they never saw him again. Word later reached them that he had moved to Wyoming, chasing rumors of gold. When James was 18 months old, Helena discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was met with joy and only a little trepidation. They knew what to expect now, knew they could handle it together. Their daughter arrived in February of 1887, during a brief warm spell between blizzards. She was small and quiet, the opposite of her boisterous brother, with Harrison's green-gray eyes and Helena's dark hair. "What shall we name her?" Harrison asked, gazing at his daughter with absolute wonder. "Rose," Helena said. "For your mother, Rose Margaret, if that pleases you." Harrison kissed her softly. "It is perfect, you are perfect. How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky. We found each other." The years flowed past like water, each one bringing new challenges and joys. James grew into a strong, curious boy who wanted to help his father with everything. Rose was quieter but clever, learning to read at 4 and asking questions that sometimes stumped even Helena. In 1890, they had another son, Nathan, who was easygoing and happy from birth. And in 1893, twin girls arrived, Emma and Charlotte, who were identical except for a small birthmark on Emma's shoulder. The house expanded to accommodate their growing family, Harrison adding rooms with Tom's help. The ranch expanded too, prosperity allowing them to purchase more land and cattle. But through all the changes, the core remained the same. Helena and Harrison, partners and lovers, facing everything together. Helena sometimes thought about that frightened young woman who had stepped off the train in Telluride 12 years ago, expecting nothing but a cold transaction. She barely recognized herself in that person. She had been transformed by love, yes, but also by hard work, by motherhood, by the daily choice to build something real with Harrison. Harrison changed too. The guarded, careful man who had picked her up from the station had become someone who laughed easily, who sang silly songs to his children, who still looked at Helena like she was the greatest gift he had ever received. He told her often that she had saved him from a life of lonely isolation, but she knew the truth. They had saved each other. One evening in the spring of 1896, after the children were finally asleep, Helena and Harrison sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold. James was now 11, Rose 9, Nathan 6, and the twins 3. The house behind them was full of noise and life, exactly as they had dreamed. "You remember the day we met?" Helena asked, her hand in Harrison's. "Every detail. You looked so proper and frightened standing on that platform. I thought you would run away within a week." "I considered it," she admitted with a smile. "That first night I lay in bed wondering what I had done, marrying a stranger and moving to the middle of nowhere. And now I cannot imagine any other life. This ranch, these children, it is everything I did not know I needed." Harrison lifted her hand to his lips. "You transformed me, Helena. I was so determined to keep everything as a transaction, to protect myself from being hurt again. But you showed me that love is worth the risk. That partnership can become something far greater than two people just surviving together. We did that for each other." Helena leaned her head on his shoulder. "And we are still transforming every day." "What do you mean, I am pregnant again?" Harrison sat up straight, his eyes wide. "Are you certain, very certain? I think we may have one more blessing coming in December." His laugh rang out across the valley, and then he was kissing her, gentle and passionate at once. "6 children. We will need an even bigger house. And a bigger dining table. And more hands to help with the ranch. And more love." Helena cupped his face in her hands. "Though I think we have plenty of that." "An infinite amount," Harrison agreed. "For you, for our children, for whatever comes next." They sat together as the stars emerged, one by one, filling the sky with light. The mountains held them safe in the valley, and the house behind them held their sleeping children, and their hearts held each other. Their final child, a boy they named Daniel, arrived healthy and strong on Christmas Day of 1896. The children were enchanted by their new brother, even the twins who were barely old enough to understand. James held him with careful reverence. Rose sang to him. Nathan wanted to show him all his toys immediately. And Emma and Charlotte took turns trying to make him smile. "Our family is complete," Helena said as they christened Daniel the following month, surrounded by friends and neighbors who had become like family over the years. "Complete and perfect," Harrison agreed, his arm around her waist. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle and broken equipment, childhood illnesses that terrified them both. James broke his arm falling from a horse when he was 13. Rose developed pneumonia at 15 and nearly died, surviving only because of Martha's nursing skills and Helena's refusal to leave her side. Nathan proved to be terrible at school but brilliant with animals, able to gentle even the most skittish horse. The twins were inseparable and equally mischievous, getting into scrapes that turned Harrison's hair prematurely gray. But through everything, Helena and Harrison stood together. They had learned long ago that transformation was not a one-time event, but a constant process, a daily choice to love and support each other even when it was difficult. In 1907, James married a schoolteacher named Anna, and they settled on a portion of the ranch that Harrison deeded to them. Their first grandchild, a girl named Helena after her grandmother, arrived the following year, and Helena Sutton cried when she held her namesake for the first time. "I never dreamed I would have this," she told Harrison that night as they lay in bed. They were both 51 now, gray-haired and weathered, but still deeply in love. "A husband who adores me, children who have grown into good people, grandchildren to spoil. It is more than I ever hoped for." "You made it possible," Harrison said, kissing her temple. "Your courage in answering that advertisement, your willingness to take a chance on a lonely rancher with nothing but calloused hands and a struggling ranch. The best decision I ever made. The children grew and left, one by one, to build their own lives. Rose became a nurse and moved to Denver but visited often. Nathan took over managing the day-to-day operations of the ranch, proving to have inherited his father's skill and his mother's determination. Emma became a teacher, while Charlotte surprised everyone by becoming a photographer, documenting the changing West with her camera. Daniel, the baby, studied law and opened a practice in Telluride, defending miners and small ranchers against corrupt companies. Helena and Harrison entered their 60s with grace, slowing down but never stopping. They still rose early and worked hard, though now they had help and could afford to rest when they needed it. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, watching sunsets and holding hands. They still made love, less frequently perhaps, but with no less passion, their bodies familiar and dear to each other after so many years. In the summer of 1920, they celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary with all their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch. There were 17 grandchildren now, ranging from 12-year-old Helena to baby Christopher, just 3 months old. The house overflowed with noise and laughter, exactly as they had always wanted. After dinner, as the sun began to set, James raised his glass in a toast. To my parents, who showed all of us what real love looks like, who built this ranch with their own hands and filled it with family, who proved that sometimes the best things come from taking a chance on a stranger. Everyone raised their glasses, and Helena felt tears sting her eyes. Harrison squeezed her hand, and she knew he was equally moved. Later, when everyone had gone to bed and it was just the two of them again, they walked out to the hill behind the house where they could see the entire valley spread below them. The house lights glowed warm in the darkness, and they could hear distant laughter from their children catching up inside. "You remember the day I taught you to shoot?" Harrison asked. "Of course. It was the day after Dale Wheaton threatened you. That was the day I first thought I might be falling in love with you. You were so determined to learn, so steady even though you were frightened. I looked at you holding that rifle and I thought, this woman is stronger than she knows." Helena smiled. "I remember the day I knew I loved you. It was when the foal was born and you were so gentle with the mare, so patient. I realized you were the best man I had ever known. We have had a good life, haven't we? The best life. Better than I ever imagined possible." She turned to face him, seeing the boy he had been beneath the lines of age. "I would choose you again, Harrison, 1,000 times over. And I would choose you, every single time." They kissed there on the hill, surrounded by the land they had worked and the family they had created, and it felt exactly the same as their first real kiss by the fireplace all those years ago. Love, it turned out, did not diminish with time. It only grew deeper, richer, more essential. Helena Sutton lived to be 79 years old, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, her hand held firmly in Harrison's until the very end. She passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1933, with the windows open to let in the smell of new grass and distant cattle. Harrison survived her by only 8 months, his heart, the doctors said, simply giving out from grief. But their children knew better. He had lived a full life, and when it was time to go, he went to be with the woman who had transformed him from a lonely rancher into a husband, father, and grandfather, whose love had created a legacy that would last for generations. They were buried side by side on the hill behind the house, with matching headstones that read simply, "Partners in life, united in love." And every year on their anniversary, their descendants gathered at the ranch to tell the story of Helena and Harrison, the mail-order bride and the cowboy who proved that sometimes the most binding contracts are the ones written on the heart. The ranch remained in the family for decades, passing from Nathan to his children and grandchildren. The house was expanded again and again, but the original rooms where Helena and Harrison had first learned to love each other were preserved like a shrine. Their great-great-grandchildren walked the same floors, looked out the same windows at the mountains, and felt the echoes of that great love that had started with a simple transaction and become the foundation of an entire family. Because that was the real transformation in the end. Not just that Helena and Harrison had fallen in love, though that was miraculous enough, but that their love had multiplied, creating ripples that spread outward through time, touching people who would never even know their names. Every happy marriage in the family traced its roots back to that day, in 1883, when a frightened young woman stepped off a train, and a lonely rancher took a chance on something more than a business arrangement. They had both been so certain that marriage was nothing more than a transaction, a practical exchange of services and security, and they had both been so wrong. Marriage, they discovered, could be the greatest transformation of all, turning strangers into soulmates, houses into homes, and solitary survival into a shared journey of love that death itself could not diminish. Their story became legend in Telluride, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. But for those who had known them, who had seen Harrison's face when Helena entered a room or heard Helena laugh at one of Harrison's terrible jokes, the truth was simpler and more profound. They had loved each other with everything they had, every day, through joy and hardship, through the mundane and the extraordinary. They had chosen each other, not once in a moment of desperation, but over and over again in 1,000 small decisions that added up to a lifetime. And in the end, what more could anyone ask for than that? To be loved completely, to love in return with equal fervor, to build something lasting with another person, something that would outlive them both and continue to bring light to the world long after they were gone. Helena had thought marriage was a transaction. Harrison had shown her it could be a transformation. But together, they proved it could be both and neither and something far greater. A partnership of souls, a fusion of hearts, a love story for the ages written not in grand gestures but in daily devotion, not in poetry but in the prose of shared life, not in fantasy but in the hard-won reality of two imperfect people who found perfection in each other. And that, truly, was the greatest transformation of all.